right there. All right, let's get into these predictions, man. Some great football games coming up this week. Starting tomorrow, Florida heads on the road to take on the Utah Utes. Spoke to Billy Napier today on the SEC teleconference call. Got to ask him about altitude. They drove out to Dallas last night because of the hurricane. Okay, drove out to Dallas, stayed in the hotel out there, and this afternoon around 5 o'clock they flew the rest of the way to Utah. And elevation's a problem. You know, elevation's like 4,700 feet up there where they play for the Utes stadium is at. What city is that? I don't know my geography.
Isn't it Salt Lake?
Yeah, I would assume Salt Lake.
Either way. So it's elevation's pretty rough up there, right? I was wondering, like, hey, how are you acclimating to that? Not really. Just getting in 24 hours early, spoke to a bunch of specialists, spoke to a bunch of guys in the NFL, all that good stuff. Hey, I'm here to tell you, I got family out there in Colorado. That altitude is real. The moment you step down in it, you're like, I mean, it is something else, bro. So I think it's a relatively big part. He brushed it off. I mean, and he has more information than I do. Don't get me wrong. That dude spoke to specialists. He talked to everybody. He's got all of the resources at bay. But it's just not what you normally like. Typically, teams are traveling in early. They're spending a couple of days acclimating to the elevation, or they're practicing in elevation, and then moving over. Nothing. Going to move in 24 hours before. All his intel tells him that's all good. We'll see if it plays a factor. I don't think it does. The biggest factor in this football game we found out today, Cam Rising will not be playing. But what if I told you that was a relatively moot point? What if I told you quarterback play wasn't necessarily the key to this football game? These two teams faced off last year. Everybody knows that. They played in Gainesville in a real hot, sweaty, swampy environment, pun intended. They took 134 offensive snaps between the two football teams a year ago. 78 of those offensive snaps were run plays, okay? That's 60% of snaps last year in this football game were just runs, just standard running of the football between these two football teams. And by the way, the quarterback play was very superior to what we're about to get on Saturday in this matchup, right? Cam Rising, Anthony Richardson, slightly better than what we're about to talk about in this football game with regards to quarterback play. It should be noted that Vegas doesn't necessarily agree with me. This line opened up at 9 points, 10 points, 11 points, some books, depending on where you look at it, in favor of Utah with Cam Rising at the quarterback position. Since he has been deemed out for this football game, that number's been bet down all the way to -4, still in favor of the Utah Utes. So Vegas is telling you Rising's worth a tutty. I don't necessarily believe that to be the case. The key, in my opinion, is the run game, is the ground game in this football game. And if that is the key, well, Gator fans, I'm here to tell you there's good news, right? Florida has two great backs. Montrell Johnson and Trevor Etienne are a great pairing, and they could very well take the game over. But there is a problem in that equation. If Florida's game plan is to go in, and if there's a requirement in this football game is to run the ball successfully, to have a recipe for success, or to win this ball game, or to protect Graham Mertz, all that good stuff, that's not necessarily great, because Utah finished in the top 25 in rushing yards allowed per game the last 4 seasons under Kyle Whittingham. These dudes strap. These dudes play the run game really, really well and have for year in, year out success. Oh, and by the way, on the flip end, Florida was 95th in the country last year in rushing yards allowed per game. Okay, a lot of that was because they were behind in a lot of football games. They were getting a lot more attempts, but 95th in the country last year. Granted, young football team replacing a lot of issues, cancel culture, if you will, getting rid of the cancers in the football team last year. A lot of turmoil, a lot of turnover, all that good stuff. They should be a better football team, you would think. But in a football game that prioritizes stopping the run and running the ball successfully on both sides of the football, Utah heavily favored in this matter. And guess what? They got a defensive tackle in Junior Tafuna, who is a preseason All-Pac-12 guy. He's going to be a really good football player this year, has played ever since his freshman year, going into his junior year now. Already got about 30 games under his belt as a defensive tackle, and Florida is likely to be without their starting center in this matchup. I don't think this football game was ever going to be 44-42. It's not the brand of football that these two football teams will play. These two football teams prioritize running the football and playing gap sound defense. And quarterback play, like I said, will be very, very below average, with Graham Mertz and Bryson Barnes being the two quarterbacks available in this football game. Oh, and by the way, guys, the Utah Utes may play in the Pac-12, and they may be going to the Big 12. That is an SEC football team disguised as whatever the conference they're in right now. They play a brand of football that is SEC ball. Take about 68 offensive snaps a game. They're going to run it 37 times. They're going to throw it 30 times. They're going to be really, really balanced, lean towards the run. Defensively, they're going to stop the run. They're going to play smack you in the mouth football, and they're going to control the lines of scrimmage. They're an SEC football team, okay? And by the way, Bryson Barnes, Utah's backup, he's going to add into the run game, okay? In the one game he started last year, I think he had 11 rushing attempts for about 85 yards. He's an athlete. It's one thing you will notice about Utah's roster. When you study them top to bottom, they recruit football players, dude. They recruit guys like Bryson Barnes, who was a relatively good high school football quarterback, broke state records as a high school football quarterback. But you know what he also did? He had 135 career tackles as a safety. Because dude's just a football playing some bitch, and that's what they recruit. That's all they recruit at Utah. Give me the Utes in a close football game. Okay, I like them by a field goal, and they're a 4-point favorite. So lay the points, or actually take the points if you're Florida. Give me Florida +4. I think Utah wins it in a close one. What say you, boys?
I had pretty much the exact same analysis on it. I think it's week 1. You're going to have a lot of fatigue in teams. It's going to be sloppy, a lot of mistakes, probably 2 turnovers each on each side. Low-scoring game, Utah eventually wins. I just don't think Florida has the horses to keep up with Utah, especially in that elevation.
By the way, asked him today, if you see a single cramp from Florida, Billy Napier's a liar. I'm just kidding. But I did ask him, hey, are you ready for a 4-quarter football game? Because this is what this is going to be. Are you conditionally ready? And he's like, oh, yeah, we're good. Not worried about it. Not worried about altitude, not worried about his team's conditioning levels. Most coaches, again, this is the Sabanisms mixed with their actual true personalities. He's very Saban in the media availability. He is, monotone. He don't act like he wants to be there. And in front of a room, he's very boisterous, right? When he's outside of cameras, very, very strong personality. It's why he is who he is. He's a successful football coach, right? But when it comes to kind of giving you the answer, he ain't really there for it. He's not really there. For ready to talk to the media. So yeah, I got Florida, Utah in a very close football game there.